I was raised in Somerset, Kentucky, mostly. I mean, we lived throughout the country in different places, Hawaii, Tennessee for a little while, but mostly in Somerset. I grew up son of a single mom, mostly. My father wasn't really in the picture. So, you know, I was, kind of a troubled child. I got in a lot of trouble. No positive male father figure around to guide me and stuff. Yeah, I was the oldest of three kids. There was my younger sister who was 2 years younger than me, and about the time I was 13, I got a little brother, a little half brother, and I was kind of his father figure for a while, so that kind of made me grow up fast in a lot of ways. But it was about my junior year in high school that I kept getting in trouble in class and stuff, and so the counselor there said, "You need to talk to an Army recruiter, or we're going to have you start talking to a police officer next time you get in trouble." And so I said, "Well, I'll talk to the Army recruiter then." So I talked to the Army recruiter. He's a pretty cool guy. He's down to earth. He was like, it's not going to be fun in basic training, because that's the biggest fear, is basic training. But you'll get through it, and it's basically up to you after that. Went to college for maybe 2 weeks at Somerset Community College, and I just was a horrible student. I never took a book home in high school and somehow managed to pass. When I got to college, it was like, wow, I'm failing my classes, and I'm barely 2 weeks into it. And so I just quit going, and I started thinking about it for a long time. I read my Bible, prayed about it, and eventually I was like, I think I'm gonna join the Army, thinking back to 2 years prior when I met that recruiter. So my mom had gotten married to about a couple of months prior to that. We moved in with my stepdad, and I asked him to go with me because, he was the first father figure I was ever starting to get. He came with me, and we talked to the recruiter, and he asked me what I wanted to do, and I said, I'd had a friend who'd gotten assigned to Europe, and I was like, wow, I could go to Europe and get paid while I'm there. It'd be like a free vacation. And so he said, you can be a truck driver and deliver mail all over Europe. And so I was like, that sounds like a really good deal. So I signed up, went to MEPS, did all the physical stuff.
What year, what age were you?
I was 2002, and I was 18.
Okay.
I was 18 years old when I went to MEPS. And I didn't tell any of my friends that I was going in, but I was on the delayed entry program for a couple of months, and eventually they shipped me off to basic in Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri. I went to, my first duty station was in Mannheim, Germany. It was actually my only duty station. And when I got there, my unit had been deployed to Iraq for, I think, a month or two, or the Kuwait border. This would have been in March or April of 2003. The Iraq War just started whenever I got there. And we got there, and it was all rear detachment people. And they basically told us that, your unit's gone, but you're going to be joining them pretty soon. And so it was odd, because right after that, they stuck us in this German preparation course and all the basic in-processing stuff that we needed to, do well in U.S. Army Europe. But we were supposed to be leaving any minute. So basically, for a month, we in-processed to Germany, and then we left to Iraq. So we fly out of Mannheim, Germany to Italy for a little stop for like a couple hours. Then we get to Kuwait, and there's like a 2 or 3 week, we're trying to find our unit. Where's our unit at? We're 6 people or 7 people lost in Kuwait, basically, going from tent to tent, little camp to little camp, because it was very chaotic back then. There were little forward operating bases everywhere. People were moving, every day, and our unit was on the move. And eventually we found our unit, and then it was in forward operating base Dogwood in Iraq. Like I said, we found our unit, but Staff Sergeant Sanchez didn't give us any ammo. So we get to Iraq, and everybody's like, "You guys got these M16s?" And a couple of guys had the squad automatic weapon saw. Where's your ammo at? And he's like, "Well, they didn't give us any ammo." I guess Staff Sergeant Sanchez didn't trust us with it. But when we met our unit, I remember I asked a guy for a magazine, and he gave it to me, because he was like, "This is crazy. You guys are, we could be ambushed any minute." And I guess then it kind of started to hit home that we had actually arrived in a war zone when we were on the road from one base to another, and they said, you should probably have bullets ready to go because you never know what's going to happen. Eventually, they tell me, we're going to be doing what's called the Red Ball mission. And the Red Ball mission is a name they took from World War II, I believe, to where you deliver all the supplies to the front lines. And our job would be to go to Cedar, which is the first base north of Kuwait, meet another unit that drives up from Kuwait, grab their supplies, and deliver them to Dogwood, where we were living, Baghdad International Airport, or BIOP, and to Crit. It's like a little triangle. And we're going to go do this triangle over and over and over and over again until they tell us we can go home. That was basically what they told us we'd be doing. But they wouldn't let me drive a truck. They said, you got to have, at least, 500 miles of, passenger time before you can actually drive one. And then when I got to drive one finally, they told me I couldn't eat. Keep in mind, we're driving for 8, 10, 12 hours at a time. I want to eat because I'm hungry. And they say, well, you can't eat until you got 500 more miles. And eventually I get my 500 miles and they tell me I can eat. Then the guy next to me takes off his Kevlar because he's hot. And I'm like, I want to take off my Kevlar for a minute. I'm hot. He's like, 500 more miles. And it just kept going like that over and over again. Every time he'd do something, he'd be like, you got to pay your dues. You got to pay your dues over and over again. We didn't have armor on our trucks. We eventually put sandbags in the floor that would stop anything we ran over, hopefully. But I just remember that it was extremely odd when we started taking the extra flak vests and draping them over the doors of the trucks to stop bullets and improvised explosive devices, IEDs, and all these different little ways that we could think of to make ourselves safer. That what they have today with 2-inch thick armored vehicles and sappy plates in their vest and these helmets with night vision goggles on. We didn't have any of that stuff, and it was just a little scary at times, knowing that the stuff you're wearing wouldn't stop anything more than a 9mm bullet. November was a watershed month for me, but it's like November 15th or 18th, something like that. I can't remember the exact date. But we're going north. It's a different mission. We're going somewhere different to deliver some supplies, and one of our units runs over, or one of our trucks in our convoy runs over an IED, and it was the wrecker vehicle, so we couldn't hook it up. The wrecker was there to hook up to other trucks in case they broke down, and it hit that truck, and the person inside was he was slightly wounded in his arm, and I was like, well, it's bound to happen eventually. It wasn't bad or anything. I didn't see it again. I could just keep on living in that.
Did you hear it when it went off?
I heard it, and then I saw him on the side of the road getting treated, and then I saw the truck was leaking a lot of fluids, and that was it. I mean, I guess the point I'm trying to make here is I kept trying to just kind of wish it away, like pretend it wasn't happening, because I know I said that our unit was pretty lucky, but prior to that mission, I'd played Risk in the MWR tent with this guy all the time. He was in another platoon. We never went on missions together or anything. Then one day he's not there. He had gotten injured really bad in his face, like he'd been ripped apart with an IED, and they sent him home. And he just one day he's there, one day he's not, and you don't see it, you don't hear it, you don't really want to think about it, so you just kind of put it off. And then I get to this mission where I'm seeing a guy on the side of the road. It's getting a little bit more present to me. First there was a guy I heard about that I knew who got injured. Now I'm looking at a guy who's slightly injured, but still it doesn't seem very threatening. Well, anyway, we wait for our unit to send another convoy to evacuate him and hook up our truck. And they also send a unit from an infantry unit to provide security for us because we were going to be out there for a while. And instead of going to where we were supposed to go, we realized we didn't have time to get there before nightfall, which back then we only did missions during the day instead of night like they do now. They said we're going to reroute you to a place called Al-Taqaddum, Iraq, which was near Fallujah. And you know a lot about Fallujah. In 2004, there was that's the Battle of Fallujah. It was like one of the hotbeds for insurgent violence and whatnot. They said we're going to drive you right through there, and we're going to get to Al-Taqaddum. And like I said, I didn't know anything about Fallujah. I said it's sounds like a pretty good idea to me. Looks like we can get off early today. You know, everybody's all right. Trucks are all hooked up. We got, you know, combat arms guys provide security. We'll be good to go. We start driving through the city, and, you know, this is like the worst case scenario. They kept telling us, you know, whatever you do, don't stop, because we had buildings under high rises beside us. You know, we had crowds of people to the left and right. You know, it's just, you know, perfect ambush situation. Next thing you know, convoy comes to a dead halt, and does that. You know, you're just thinking, you know, something bad's going to happen. Something bad's going to happen. But, you know, I'm distracted because there's a little kid, you know, sitting next to the truck. He's trying to sell me some bananas, and I'm just thinking to myself, where does little kid in the middle of Iraq get bananas at? Because those are really fresh looking. I'd like to have those, because we hadn't had anything to eat but like prepackaged food for months. Fresh bananas are looking good. So, you know, I'm reaching for my wallet. You know, I'm like, I'm going to get some bananas off this kid, even though I'm not supposed to. And next thing I know, this loud boom goes off. You know, it's the loudest boom I've ever heard. And I look in my my rearview mirror, which would be about right there to me. I see this dark black smoke just billowing up about 2 or 3 trucks back. And the next thing I know, there's just all this machine gun fire going off, you know, everywhere, every direction. And I start hearing the little pings of metal hitting my truck, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm getting shot at. My truck's being shot right now, and it can't stop bullets. You know, this little inch-thick armor, not even inch, but like 1/8 of an inch thick armor that's on the side of the truck. It's not going to stop these bullets. Like, my first instinct is to duck down. So I duck down. I kind of peer over the side of the window, maybe hoping, you know, if the terrorist doesn't see me, he won't shoot me. So that's like, seems like an eternity. I'm like fighting with myself. Get back up, get back up. You know, you should be finding the enemy and shooting at him right now. And then I realize, you know, I hear this laughing sound, and it's like the guy next to me is just firing his machine gun. It's crazy, you know. He's got to be melting the barrel or something. All those little pinging sounds I hear are the brass from his gun hitting the roof. So it's not my truck being shot. It's just him, you know, having a field day up there. Anyway, I realize that, and I get back up, you know, and I look out, and I see all these people running. And, you know, the next, you know, couple of minutes is kind of hazy to me looking back. But I remember I tried to fire my weapon up at a rooftop, because it was what we were supposed to do, like fire, suppressive fire, to like keep anybody's heads down that might be trying to kill us. The trucks are still all stopped. You know, I fire my weapon and it jams. You know, first time I fire my weapon in combat and it jams. I'm like, great, good job, Travis. You just didn't clean your weapon. Horrible soldier, you know, you should be ashamed of yourself. I fire the weapon again, it jams again. It jams like 3 times until eventually, you know, it starts doing what it's supposed to do. I'm looking in front of me, and the guy on the 50 caliber machine gun is just, you know, shooting all kinds of stuff. And I don't see anything. I don't see a single bad guy. I don't see anybody dressed in black or wearing a cape or anything like that. You know, it's just people running from the truck. You know, that little boy just disappears into the crowd, and I'm thinking, you know, I hope that little boy don't get shot. But everyone in the whole convoy is just laying waste to these buildings, and, you know, after that, it's kind of dazed out. Next thing I know, you know, I'm still looking for a target, and the guy that was shooting his machine gun up top says, go, let's go. The convoy's moving, and I see that the truck had started to move in front of me and just hit the gas, and we floored out of there. And after that, kind of like, if you ever hear about going to war and, you know, loss of innocence, I mean, nothing happened to me. I wasn't injured or anything, but, you know, I consider that my point where I realized, you know, the war was real. I lost my innocence, and, you know, I realized that these people were there were people out there trying to kill us at that point. But we got to Takedum, you know, and I realized that, you know, my hands had started to shake, you know, really bad. And never had that problem before. After that, my hands shook for probably, you know, 1.5 to 2 years or something, until I started taking medication for it. But lots of us that were in our unit, we were real, you know, childlike, 18-year-old, 19-year-old people, and some of the people had saw a lot worse than what I had saw in that instance. You know, I know I had friends that, you know, said they saw a guy with a grenade and they killed him, and that guy was just, the guy who, you know, killed the guy with the grenade was just super quiet after that. Real friendly guy before, always telling jokes, and then after that he was like super depressed, you know, just always thinking about what he did, and always, you know, he knew he did the right thing because it was, you know, it was a bad guy, but at the same time he felt guilty for killing a guy, and, you know, who wouldn't? One bomb had went off like I had saw next to the truck, 3 trucks behind me. Another bomb had went off towards the back where the cavalry scouts is. You know, my friend had actually killed the guy with the grenade. The cavalry scouts that we were with basically just laid waste to a bunch of buildings. I mean, they had tore up some stuff. So I know for a fact that, you know, that some of the people in that crowd probably got shot by accident, and that's something that, you know, that kind of haunts me. The fact that, you know, people in my unit probably, you know, shot people that weren't supposed to be shot. And, you know, you want to say, you know, those people should be tried and hung, executed, and all these different things, but, you know, you put a bunch of people out there with loaded machine guns and you make bombs go off, and you got people running towards you, and you got all these different rules and procedures about what you're supposed to do, and bad things are going to happen. And so, you know, I don't really know what to say about that. I didn't take aim at any person that day in fire, so I can't really speak for what it's like for those people or what they went through. Like I said, mid-January, maybe early February, we leave Iraq for the first time. I didn't get any leave while I was there. Lots of people did, so it was great for me. I was ready to go.
What was it like coming home?
I didn't go home. I went to Germany. I went to, you know, I went back to Mannheim. There were protesters, honestly. It was kind of weird. Germans were protesting outside of our barracks when we got back. I guess Germany was pretty against the war, and so that was kind of odd. I know that the Vietnam generation had to experience a lot of that. I mean, nobody was spitting on us, nobody was throwing Molotov cocktails or anything like that, but, you know, it was kind of weird, you know, because I knew people back home were like getting really patriotic, hanging American flags out and all this stuff, but we got to come home to protesters. I think, I went home on leave after about a week or so. I went home for 3 weeks maybe, yeah.
Did anybody notice a change in you?
Yeah, my sister did. She woke me up one time and I just started freaking out. I think I was starting to have symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder about this time. Like I said, I had the shaking hands after that November incident. I guess whatever happened afterwards, you know, made me just, you know, on edge. I was starting to have panic attacks. I was nervous in crowds, I noticed. And I didn't know what all this stuff was at first. I mean, it was just weird. And yeah, she woke me up one time and I started screaming at her, and I don't remember what happened really. And she told me later on, I was like, sorry. I figured, you know, I guess this is what happens now. I have to get used to it. After my leave, my family and stuff, I got back to my unit and we just started partying like nonstop. And yeah, it's cool to celebrate things for a week, but whenever you're drinking in a group for like every day, 5 days a week maybe, you know, for a year straight, it starts to take a toll on your body. And, you know, looking back now, I think that a lot of it had to do with anxiety. It was like a lot of us were, you know, self-medicating. Because I spent my entire Iraq paycheck, you know, I'd saved like 10 grand or something. I spent it all at bars in 2004, every bit of it. And we all did. Every one of us drank, except for my friend Rutherford. And he had managed to save all of his money somehow the whole year. And he drank with us every night. And so this is a funny story. We found out that he still had all of his money, and we'd spent all of our money at the bar, and he'd been with us. So we started calling him 10G Rutherford. And every time we'd go to the bar until we left, he would have to buy all of our drinks. And so every one of us went back the second time broke. So that year was just, you know, constant drunken debauchery. We get in fights with people at the bars. I know that there was a lot of skinheads in Germany, believe it or not. You think after World War II they would have learned their lesson about all that stuff and not done it, but lots of neo-Nazis. And every time we'd go to the bar, like, they'd have their little corner in there, and like we'd always end up getting in a fight with them. I guess they don't like American soldiers, and American soldiers don't like Nazis. I know I don't care for Nazis. But that would happen about once every couple of weeks. And then, you know, you had the Turkish people that would try to jump us in the streets. That was weird. You know, you come back from Iraq and, you know, you're used to getting on edge about, you know, Iraqis, and you got people from Turkey that look just like Iraqis, you know, that are against the war and against the American soldiers and all this stuff because, you know, it's another Muslim country. And, you know, you're walking down the street and they would try to start fights with you. And the next thing, it just puts you on edge. And it kind of hit me there that, you know, we'd all become pretty violent. You know, we were getting in fights every week, you know, and I'm putting my friend into a wall on his side in the go-kart, and we're drinking 5 or 6 days a week, you know. And by the time our second deployment came around, I was ready to go. You know, I was getting kind of scared at that point. And, you know, I'd masked a lot of the symptoms using the alcohol. but I started to realize, maybe something was wrong with me then. But our second deployment came, and they told us we was going to Fallujah. It was actually Takeda, where we went in that November 18th thing where we got ambushed, and that was going to be where we went for our second deployment. We could come to work drunk. Nobody even cared. The senior NCOs were doing it too. I had 2004, just like the second year of the war. I mean, I don't think the Army knew what was going on, but there was no repercussions for coming to work drunk, getting in trouble. Like before we left, it was a Sunday night, and we were out drinking, and we stopped to get a donor, which is like a gyro, at this little stand, and this little Turkish guy comes up to us. He's about 5 foot tall, and it's me and 3 of my friends. And 2 of my friends are like close to 6'5". They're huge. And he says, "I'm Al Qaeda," and he's like, "F you," and he's like, just swings at my friend and tries to attack him. And so I don't touch the guy. I step back, and my friend basically waylays him, but he keeps getting back up. He had to be on some kind of like drug or something, like PCP, because he just kept getting up and trying to attack us. And I guess the owner of the gyro stand, the donor stand there, calls the Polizei come, and we all run like idiots. We should have stayed there and said we were defending ourselves, but I run even, and we get arrested, and the first sergeant's only question was like, "Why the hell are you out drinking on a Sunday night anyway when you got PT in 3 hours?" It was late in the day. It was like 3 in the morning, when they caught us, and there's no excuse, and went on. That whole incident got swept under the rug, and we deployed like it never happened. That was it, though. I mean, we'd be out at 3 in the morning every night and wake up and do PT, and then around lunch we'd take a nap, get up and do it again. I know at one point I was bleeding inside that we had drank so much. It was bad. And when we got to our second deployment in Kuwait, I had withdrawals from alcohol. I had shakes, fevers. It was pretty bad. We got there, and our mission was changed. We weren't going to be delivering supplies anymore. We were going to be escorting Iraqi and Jordanian truck drivers as they delivered their supplies. We were put on a Marine base. It was, the Al-Anbar province, I believe. And basically our job would be to ride around in up armor Humvees and make sure that things didn't go boom. And that was kind of weird because we weren't really trained for driving trucks in combat, let alone driving gun trucks and doing what we thought was kind of a combat arms mission. So they started asking for who wants to do what job. We're looking for gunners, and I remembered back to the first deployment. Just the that thing in November where a lot of combat went down and people were shooting and there was a crowd. And a lot of really hard decisions had to be made, and I was like, I would be a gunner. I think I could make good decisions. Maybe keep some people alive if I had the chance. I was actually looking forward to the deployment because, like I said, I pretty much became a full-blown alcoholic in 2004 after the first deployment, and I didn't want to go back to that when I came. I'm a religious guy. I believe in God. I'm a Christian, and I told him, I was like, "Get me through this deployment. I'm going to be straight and narrow, guarantee it. I'm not going to go back to the boozing once I get back." And he got me through the deployment, and I had a year off to stay away from the alcohol. I got we'd been out on mission. We had, been clearing traffic and delivering the supplies where they need to go. And I got a Red Cross letter and found out that my stepbrother had committed suicide. So I had to go home on emergency leave. And that was really rough. It was like they pulled me out of a combat zone where, I'm, about risking death every night. They put me in a situation where, I need to grieve. But I didn't grieve. I just shut it all down. And they basically, my family asked me to help take care of like a lot of stuff my stepdad wasn't able to do, like going through his stuff, and it was just really, really hard for about 2 weeks. And I spent most of that time, with my family helping out. I missed the funeral. That was kind of bad. And then I just kind of, I tucked it all away, didn't really face it, and went back to Iraq and dealt with it. And then I got really into the missions and stuff. I was a specialist. I decided I want to get promoted to sergeant. I got promoted on November 1st October 31st, I was, the first time I was going to be the truck commander of a Humvee. And I was I was still a specialist. They put me in charge, of, two of my friends, a gunner and a driver. And we were driving from Ford Operating Base Duke, where we were stationed at that little bitty place. And I'll tell you about that place in a minute. But we were driving from there to Iskandariyah, around in that area, and an IED hits our truck. And it's completely, like, blows 3 tires out, rips the antennas off. It, sends shrapnel flying around inside the vehicle and everything, and the Humvee's limping, it's making it. But, I'm trying to call on the radio, the Syncar's radio, the big green radios like you see in the movies, trying to call the rest of the convoy and telling me our truck's been hit and we're not going to make it much farther. And nobody's answering, And I try to get on the little, the map thing, which has a text messaging feature, I think. I'd try to tell them that way. Nothing works. And, first thing, is what had happened is my gunner passed me on the shoulder. Martin, he's like, I guess I'd been knocked out. And it was pretty brief because I remember the dust was still in the air when I came to. And I first thing I do is like, we just hit an ID, like profound statement, I just figured it out. So I asked the gunner if he's okay, and I asked the driver if he's okay, and I think everyone's okay. I mean, we all had a little bit. I had this little burning sensation in my shoulder, and I could see that, Giuliani, my driver, had a burn mark on his eye, and that, the gunner had something like cut on his nose, just minor scrapes and stuff. So I'm trying to get a hold of the convoy. We're the last truck, we're the last doing rear security. I'm like, man, they're going to leave us. Our truck is going to break down. They're going to leave us because they can't hear us. And I'm yelling on the radio. I'm like, why would they answer the call? Because it wasn't our unit. We were being loaned out to someone. And these guys, when you go to another unit, you really don't know how they deal with combat, what their standard operating procedures are, and basically if they're good at doing their job. You don't know. And so, I figured these guys are just the worst in the world. What had happened is my antenna had been blown off my truck, and eventually, my brain starts to kind of work again. I'm kind of dazed while I'm going through this. I get mad and I throw the phone at the driver. I'm like, this piece of shit don't work. Sorry about the language, but that's what I said. And I said that, and I start to hear chatter over the CB, and we have a CB. And it never dawned on me to use the CB because our platoon sergeant said, don't ever talk about sensitive information over the CB. So I just won't use it then because I don't want to give away anything and get in trouble. Eventually I hear it, and I'm like, well, this is the only communication I got, so I need to say, I break up all the chatter and tell them, look, our truck's been hit, our vehicle is disabled, we might have some wounds, I want to check my guys, can we stop the vehicles, can we stop the convoy once we get out of the kill zone? And eventually they say, what, your truck's been hit? I'm like, yeah, the IED that went off, the one you're talking on the radio hit my truck, we need to stop. And they stop it, and eventually Staff Sergeant Brockman, a guy from our unit, and some other guys come back and they do a circle around us. And turns out we got 3 flat tires. We got, the trunk, which is like, it's 2-inch thick metal, and I've got a piece of it at home. Like, it had been like mangled and ripped up. That's how strong the blast was, and like turned into like a ball almost. And like, it's just weird that you could take metal and just turn it into that. And what else, the burning in my shoulder was like I had a little piece of shrapnel that had went underneath my flak vest somehow, like melted into my skin and like stuck to the flak vest, so I just held it in spot and just sit there and burned. And and the other guy's got cuts, and he's got like a burn under his eye, but everybody's okay. We get tires and we fix the truck to where it can run, and we drive back to the base. And I remember coming back the next day, I get this ringing in my ears. I feel like I had Spider-Man hearing. I tried to tell my roommate to turn the TV down because like it was just so loud to me. And it was the next day I got promoted to sergeant. It was pretty cool. I felt like I'd really paid my dues at that point. And like a good sergeant, I took my guys out and I made them go get records from the medical guys saying that they had been treated, because I wanted to put them in for Purple Hearts if I could. And because my unit was notoriously bad for not giving people awards. We didn't get any awards for like our first deployment, like not even an Army Achievement Medal, which is like the basic thing they give. And I was a E1 private for like 6 months because they forgot to promote me. So I was like, I'm gonna do this myself because you guys probably aren't gonna do it. So I went ahead and told them to keep everything they had, gave it to the company commander, and he signed off on it, and it got lost, sure enough. So we didn't get the awards until later, when we were all in different units. We lost a guy in our unit, was Specialist Kevin Jones. We were on a mission, the mission that actually moved us from Takeda to Duke, where I did the mission where I got injured slightly, was a couple platoons were packing all of our stuff up, and we were supposed to move a routine mission. His truck, which was one of the PLSs, ran over an IED that was planted there. And it was really up armor. You had the sandbags and jet armor underneath the sandbags. And he ran over the IED, and somehow a piece of metal went up behind his seat into his back and just tore his insides up into shreds. And I was in the way back, away from all this, but I know that a lot of my friends were up there doing the first aid. My platoon sergeant was, one of my best friends, Scott was, and they said he was talking, all this normal stuff, and they put him in a helicopter and medevaced him out of there. We weren't even 10 minutes from our base where this happened. And, Captain Sheets, who, I'd been the gunner for so long, he was the acting commander because our commander was on leave. And he comes up and he tells us, Kevin, he died in the mission. And I just remember feeling so sorry for Captain Sheets because he had to, be that strong person and, lead the company when it really, wasn't his job, but, he was stepping up and filling those shoes. And he did a really good job of, being consolatory and just, a tough situation. So anyway, Kevin died on September 22nd, 2005. And, we eventually, the next day, went back on the same road and did the mission and finished it. And there's something about, being a lead gunner, it's a lot of responsibility because other units, they would do things that I still have problems, with today. You would go on missions, and there was all these standard operating procedures, like you had a spotlight, you had flares, you had glow sticks, you had warning shots, all these different steps to keep you from accidentally killing someone who's just an innocent, because if someone's coming at you with an IED, they're not going to stop, right? They're just going to keep running, hit your truck. If it's an innocent person, they see a flare come at them, a spotlight, and all this stuff, they're going to stop their truck, and everything's okay. That's fine. That's how it works. But I remember we went on one mission, and this is when we were in Duke, that a unit had just gotten there. It was a reserve unit, and I don't mean to talk bad about reserve units, but there's good ones and there's bad ones, and I was active duty, so back then, we did talk bad about reserve units. But this was a bad one, and they would go on missions, and they didn't have a spotlight, they didn't have flares, they didn't have glow sticks, they didn't have the equipment they needed, and so to get vehicles to stop, they would just shoot them. I remember we pulled out on a convoy, and I was the lead truck, and we'd left the gate right after them, and you start hearing all this gunfire in the distance, and they're doing the same job we're doing. They're just escorting trucks, right? But I've been doing this for 6-8 months, and I've not shot a vehicle yet. I fired warning shots once or twice into the ground, but I hear metal hitting metal with the bullets. These guys are shooting stuff on every turn, and I don't know if they killed anyone, but I know that they weren't following the operating procedures, and I know that after that, shortly after, we got intel saying that local insurgents were planning an ambush on us because they think the innocent civilians are being attacked by the military. And yeah, that's what's happening exactly. So you really can't blame them for that. I'd be pissed off too, if my brother was going to work and some guy shoots him, what do you do? So a lot of the insurgents, I think, are just angry, I wrote one time for a story, I wrote that, I would throw rocks at trucks that wouldn't stop, and I said, for every windshield I break, it's one less terrorist, because I didn't kill him. And if he's not a terrorist, he doesn't get killed and his 3 kids don't become terrorists, it's like 9 terrorists, just by not killing an innocent person. And those people that are out there doing that, they don't really realize that, they're going to cause an American to get killed because they're not following the rules and they're not really thinking about what they're doing. And these are the same people that will come back and they'll say that, I engaged the enemy all these different times and I did all these different heroic things. And really, they were just like me, man, just a kid who really didn't know what was going on, a truck driver probably, some kind of support unit that should have been doing his job. And we're out there just trying to be all, Rambo-like and shoot at things when really that wasn't what they were supposed to do. So they're kind of bitter about that. Might have came off there, but I think it's justified bitterness. You know, they say whenever you're in an IED attack and you get knocked unconscious, it's pretty much said and done. You got a brain damage. I got that going on, you know, and then it comes time to go home, you know. So I come back from my second deployment, just weird, man. I decided I get really religious really fast, and you know, a lot of my friends don't like it. They want to go back to the bars, and I'm just like, no, I'm not doing anything in the bar. I'm not drinking. I'm not leaving this room. I start watching all these Christian videos about God, and I watch them over and over and over again. And I get this really obsessive compulsive, like, you know, I got to clean all the time. My room was spotless. I would crawl around on the floor at nights and just pick up lint off the carpet. It was just weird. There's real control problems. So I didn't go. I know that something's wrong with me. I know that I haven't grieved about my brother. I know that, you know, I might have something wrong with me from that blast. And, you know, 2 years of combat is probably not good for anyone. So I decided to go to therapy. And so like the first or second week, I enroll myself in like a weekly social worker type deal. And just basically talk about the problems. And they tell me to like eat dark chocolate and listen to classical music and stuff. And it's nice. I mean, it's just nice to talk to someone sometimes. And I realize when I'm talking to my therapist, I've developed some real anger problems. Like I get really upset with people really fast about little things because I think that, you know, they should just listen to me and it'll be done better. I don't know. It all boils down to control, and I've realized that since, you know, I've been back like 4 years now. I'd never intended to do more than 4 years. I got in because, like, when I sat down with that counselor in high school, he told me I needed discipline, and I didn't admit it at the time, but I did. I was a little smartass, and, you know, I didn't have any direction in life. I went to college and flunked out, and I was just disappointed in myself. I knew I had the ability. I just didn't have the drive or the ambition or the structure I needed. But I'm pretty sure I had that when I got out. That, and I met my who would be my wife too later on, about a month into my deployment. After my deployment, I met who would later be my wife, Anna. Anna was from East Germany. She's a German. She grew up in Bautzen, Germany, and she had moved over to Würzburg, Germany, and was engaged to a soldier there, but he had been killed in Afghanistan the year prior. And so she met me. She was, you know, still grieving a lot, but she was trying to get out. And when I met her, my therapist had actually told me to leave and go to the bar. Weirdest thing a therapist ever told someone who had a drinking problem was to go to the bar, just do something, just get out of your room because you're going crazy. So I went, you know, and met her there, and I had a hat on my head. I wore fedoras at the time. I just thought they were the coolest thing in the world. And she took the hat off my head and said I'd give her a kiss on the cheek to get it back. And I did. And next thing you know, we're getting engaged. And I'm filling out all these immigration paperwork and stuff, fiancé visas and green cards. And I bring her back here to Kentucky. And then first thing I do in November was get an apartment, enroll in school, start at Somerset Community College.
Was that your plan all along, was to go back to school?
That was my plan.
What did you choose to study?
I chose English because I realized part of my problem before was I chose business, and I didn't really care about business at all. I was good at writing, and I like to write things, and I thought, you know, maybe I could write a war story and make $1 million on it since I'd been to Iraq. It didn't happen yet, but it might. And so I started at Somerset Community College. You know, I had the GI Bill, Montgomery GI Bill. And that was kind of rough at first. I didn't drink. I told myself not a drop of alcohol for a year once I got out, and I did that. I started getting more therapy at the VA, filing my disability claims for compensation and pension and all that. But yeah, I get back and I have to drive all the way to Lexington from Somerset, which is about an hour drive every time I want to go to the doctor. It's about 3 or 4 times a week at first. I'm getting psychiatric treatment. They eventually hooked me up at the outpatient clinic in Somerset with primary care, and they have a social worker there that I started seeing and still see. And that's what got me into that. And this is a good story too. When I got off the plane, coming back from Germany, coming home. I get off the plane. You know, I think I have a military bag with me or something that makes me look like I'm in the military. I don't remember what it was. But there's the VFW, American Legion, all these older gentlemen from Korean and World War II and Vietnam veterans just standing outside the airport with signs saying, "Welcome back." And I guess a unit had come back or something. They saw me and he's like, "Hey, welcome back, son." And I was like, "Thanks." And he pulled me aside and he's giving out cigarettes. I'm like, this is pretty weird. He's not giving out like cards, or he's not giving out like, you know, candy or something, you know, that's, you know, healthy. He's giving out cigarettes. And I took a cigarette and I smoked it, and he's like, "Look, son, first thing you need to do is start filing your claims." I was like, "What claims?" "With the VA." And I didn't even know really what the VA was. I'd heard of it, but it turns out there's this whole big medical system. You can get compensation for disabilities you get when you're in combat. I knew I could get my school paid for, but that's really all I knew. And so he tells me about all this stuff, and he's like, "Make sure you get started on that today because it's going to take months." And he was right. So I got started on it almost immediately. And I realized that there's going to be some problems when I start school because, first of all, I can't stand sitting in the front of a class. I have to sit in the back with my back to the wall. I can't stand sitting next to a window. It doesn't even make any sense. I mean, when did I ever be attacked by a sniper from a window in Iraq? So I mean, I'm thinking, you know, I was a truck driver. Where does this come in as like a logical conclusion to draw from your experiences? But I guess there's no real logic to it. Any kind of like insecurity or threat or lack of control, which had been my case, was becoming a problem. So I did well though. I sat in the back of the class. You know, I'd stay after and I'd talk to my professors. I was a lot more mature than the other students. I noticed that a lot of them were just 18, 19. They'd be sending text messages, and then I realized I had anger problems. Like they'd be sending text messages during class, and it would just infuriate me. It's like, this is just so disrespectful. This teacher's up here trying her hardest to teach us right now, and she's probably distracted by that, so I'm not getting the education I'm paying for. There was one incident where I acted out with a professor, and it was about religion. I was in argumentative writing, and I'd come back and I'd written a paper about, you know, freedom of religion in schools, and I had taken like this creative stance as like, you know, there was the creationist and evolutionist argument that was going on. I'd taken the stance. I wasn't even really picking a side. I just wanted to pick the side, play the devil's advocate. You know, this is the creationist that's being offended by school, and she got mad, and she was like, "This is a straw man argument. It's pathetic," and she said some things that just kind of like made me angry. And she had, you know, related throughout the semester she was going through some problems at home, and she had lost some family members recently, and I told her, I was like, "Look," she had started crying when me and her were arguing about the paper in class. Like, if you're not fit to teach this class, you probably shouldn't be here anyway. So I was just thinking, you know, if I was in the military and I was in combat and someone's crying that's in a leadership position, you know, they need to be taken out of command. But it wasn't combat; it was a classroom, and I felt bad because, you know, she was a human being. She was suffering emotionally, but for me, I was just in so much, you know, pain and anger and anxiety all the time. I couldn't see that anyone else around me was actually, you know, suffering from conditions. And when I told her that, you know, I was like, I didn't feel bad at all. You know, it felt like, you know, I was doing the right thing. I was calling her out when she needed to be called out. So we argued about this stupid paper once, and the next day she brought me a book by Robert Graves, Goodbye to All That, a World War I memoir. And you know, she's like, "Someday we're going to look back, we're going to laugh on this," you know, because we got into it bad in front of her class, and it made me feel really bad. I went home and I was angry, and I'd ask my friend, like, "Read this paper. Do you think it's really that bad?" And really didn't have anything to do with the paper. Didn't have anything to do with me. She was grieving. I was, you know, suffering from PTSD, and you put those two things together and you're just going to click. And that's what happened. But sure enough, she was right. We're good friends today. We still keep in touch through email. We help each other out professionally since she's an English teacher, and, you know, I'm getting ready to start working on a PhD. She wrote a letter to the VA for me to help me get my PhD funded by Voc Rehab. Great lady. And that first instance when me and her got into it was just, you know, a wake-up call for me, really, that, you know, I had anger problems and I really wasn't giving people the respect they needed. Because one of the things I would think when I got back was, you know, what are these people's problems? You know, what have they done that they deserve to, you know, feel this much self-pity? They sit here every day. All they get to do is wake up, go to work. You know, they don't have to worry about dying, their friends dying, and all this stuff. It didn't make any sense to me that anyone here in the civilian world would have a problem with, you know, anything. But it's unrealistic. It's egotistical and it's selfish, but you don't see it whenever you're suffering. Well, I got my associate's degree in a year, transferred to EKU, Eastern Kentucky University. And before with the associate's degree, it was more you really didn't have a major, you just kind of did your gen eds. And I got here and I majored in English, and one of my teachers at SEC had told me that I'd probably want to major in literature. And so I did that, and I really liked it. I like reading books, and I like writing, so this was great. I got my bachelor's, and like a year later, maybe a year and a half later, I was just tracking. I decided I wanted to start try to come out of my shell some. So I started the student veteran organization here, the EKU Vets. And that started with me and like 5 other guys I knew that were veterans here that I'd met in classes and stuff. I was like, look, let's start a group, because I noticed other schools are starting groups, and we should probably be getting behind the curve here because we have no student veteran representation here whatsoever. I'd done some work with non-traditional students, and they represented veterans, but I was like, veterans stick together. We look out for each other. I noticed that really the only office for veterans was one small place in the student services building, and all she did was file claims. I know that my plan initially was just like the veteran service officer, like you get the VFW or something. We would be that here on campus. We would mentor other veterans, lobby for improved services, try to get a lot of the stuff they got going on today. And so, I don't know, I thought working with people that had similar backgrounds and circumstances, that I could relate to. I was lonely, honestly. Yeah, I made a few friends in classes, but nobody I would give a phone call to or go over to their house or anything like that. It was basically me and Anna for a long time. I didn't have many friends. I'm a hard guy to get along with because of the anger issues and the anxiety, and I don't like leaving the house a lot of times. I have to take medication to leave. I'm on medication right now just to be here and talk about stuff that I'm always thinking about. But back then it was like, I don't want to be just a mediocre student. I want to do really well, and I want to make some changes. I want to show God, because I told you I'd gotten religious, and I believe that God had kept me alive in that IED blast. And I wanted to show him that it was a worthwhile investment. And I said, if I could start doing things that help people, then I can do that. And so as my senior year came along, I was like, I'm going to start this student veteran group, get it going. I'm not really leadership material, but I'm good at organizing things and getting stuff done fast. So what I'll do is I'll set everything up, and then I'll let somebody else take over. And we got a new guy coming in, Patrick, who's going to be the next president. He's gung-ho. He's got ideas. He had been to UK, and he saw what they had done. He's like, let's bring some of those ideas here, and let's get to talking to the Student Veterans of America group, and let's get this thing bigger than what it is. So we had the group. We had the logo. I'm going to graduate school at Eastern, so I'm going to stay around and help. I'm good at writing letters and getting things approved that way. And he's good at talking to people. So me and him worked well together. He was the outgoing person. I was the introvert who could, get stuff done fast and right. And so we were just a really good team. And we set some goals, like get a resource center for veterans, get a veterans lounge, and lobby for improved services, get veteran service officers in here. We set all these different goals, and pretty much today all of them have been met. We got a lot of good services here at EKU. It's been a lot of the groups really done a lot to help get that here. When I started working on my master's, I was still suffering from PTSD pretty bad. Starting a veterans group didn't magically make it go away. But, it helped build my self-confidence to where, I can be out and interact with other people, even if it's just veterans for now. So, I started working on my master's. I was like, there's something to the idea, you avoid the symptoms of PTSD. Like, I stay locked in my house all the time. When I first got back, I stayed watching those Christian videos and picking up lint off the ground. I'm avoiding the symptoms, but I'm also avoiding my life. And I saw that was a problem. And so I was like, I'm not going to avoid these memories, of what I did in Iraq. So when I started working on my master's, I got to really specify what I was going to research in literature. And so I said, I'm going to do war literature. I'm going to read and write about war literature all the time, until I can handle it. And I ended up writing my thesis about Iraq and Afghanistan war literature. And that has been a big help. Like, having all this firsthand experience, I can say, yeah, well, when the author says this, it might be a symptom of PTSD. And, I've got the experience to back that up. I've, read the literature, the research about, psychological impacts of combat and all this different stuff. So I was able to put, a painful past to work for me in my schoolwork. That's another thing. Work, when you're a veteran coming back with PTSD, is, it's pretty hard. The first job I took, I really didn't need it because, I got a pretty good disability check. I was getting good VA benefits for GI Bill. So, I wasn't hurting for money or anything, living in a little one-bedroom apartment. But I decided to get a job just so I could get out the house, maybe do something physical. So I got a job stocking groceries. I worked at a grocery store for a while when I was like 16. And I was like, I'll do that again because it was fun. I enjoyed it. But I couldn't get along with the people I was working with. The people that were, the co-stockers, they would be slacking on the job or something. And then the boss would tell me to do something. One time I remember I pulled the boss aside and I gave him a speech about proper leadership etiquette and how he's got to talk to his troops about commanding them or they won't respect him and they won't listen to him when it really counts. And I got home that night, I was like, what the hell are you talking about, man? This guy's just stocking groceries at Kroger and you're telling him about, combat scenarios where, are you crazy? That's probably how people are taking you. And so the job didn't work out, man. I couldn't do it because everything was just so serious. Everything had such dire consequences here that it really didn't. And a lot of it just, went back to control, not being able to control things in combat. And so I quit that job after like 2 months. Eventually a graduate assistant job popped up and I took it. And so I got to work with people with different disabilities, learn about those. And they knew I had PTSD. And so they weren't as hard on me because I knew I would, like when they'd put me like in the filing room, I couldn't find a file, they'd come in, I'd be cussing, I'd be yelling at the files, I'd be like, who moved the file? And it was just totally out of place because, I'm not up here, I'm down here and I got bosses and I should be listening and not yelling in the filing room at things that are inanimate objects. So they'd tell me to take a walk because they had, take a walk, cool off, count to 10. They had all these different techniques because they're used to working with people with disabilities. So that was a good first step into like working in an academic environment. And then Brett gave me a job as a GA in the Veterans Office, which is great because I'd be working with veterans. And my part of my job would be teaching a class. I'd be teaching the GSO Veterans Orientation course, and I taught that. And he asked me basically what I thought they needed to learn, and I looked back at me when I first came back. I looked at statistics, and 1 in 3, 1 in 5 have PTSD. 1 in however many's got this, and this. And I'm like, I think these guys need to learn about disabilities and PTSD and stuff. Even if they don't have it, the odds are one of their buddies does. And so I taught Anthony and Janet Sehorn's Tears of a Warrior book as part of the reading. Instead of the EKU Reads book, they have a book they assigned to all freshman students. I took that and replaced it with the Tears of a Warrior. And so the veterans in class would read that. Then I would teach them basic study skills because I was a good student. I worked nonstop. I had like a graduated summa cum laude. I had a 4.0 in my graduate program. I was focused when it came to academic stuff. And so I taught them all the stuff that that helped me really do well. And I taught them stuff about PTSD too. I taught them about how, because writing and reading about war had helped me in my master's program a lot, probably more than any therapy had. Just facing it. And so I gave them options where they could write or read about write about their experiences they wanted, and I would publish them in a journal for them. We'd get grants from wherever, and we'd put them in a book. We did that. We got like a book full of like 29 stories or something, Journal of Military Experience. And that was good, A lot of those guys, they told me afterward, I did a lot for them. I really liked the chance to see their words in print. They think it means something now. It's solidified, kind of like this project. You get to see that your words are going to be carried on and they mean something to someone. It's done a lot for me. Like I said, I came from a smart-ass kid to someone who's got a master's degree in 4 years. I went through a lot. I've seen some things I can't unsee. Lost some things that I won't get back, but at the same time, I've gained a lot too. I heard one old veteran say at the veteran service officer training one time. He said, "The best person to talk to if you ever have a problem is another veteran, and that if you don't feel like people understand you, find one and talk to them about what you went through."